Hello and welcome to From Mrs. to Me, a podcast where you'll be inspired by courageous stories of strength and resilience told by women just like you who have been through the upheaval of divorce. This is their journey from Mrs. to Me, finding their true identity and creating a bold, beautiful life. I'm Crissy Freeman and I'm your host, a certified life coach and divorced mother of two. Join me each week as we explore real stories of divorce and what it takes to transform and live in alignment with the real you. Hello, and welcome to another episode of From Mrs. to Me. I'm your host, Crissy Freeman. My next guest, Todd Glacy, currently describes himself as an enlightened advocate, empowerment educator, and instigator of joy. I love that. I just have to say that. As a professional speaker, musician, counselor, facilitator, mentor, and interfaith minister, he loves nothing more than sharing his passion and talents for bringing people together in creative community and inspiring them to tune in and reconnect with their truest and best selves in order to experience life with a greater sense of peace, purpose, happiness, and well-being. Thank you so much, Todd, for agreeing to join us. And
Sure.
I have to say, you are a brave soul to be the first male guest on the show.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. I thought it was, I know working with men that it's very helpful often to get a woman's perspective because for some reason we tend to think that we're so different, but in reality, we're really not. So, yeah, that was a good excuse to come on and chat with women.
I love it. I'm so glad you reached out. It was the perfect timing. So if you're listening, you may be asking, wait a second, this is called From Mrs. to Me, not Mr. to Me. Well, as Todd just mentioned, I do think it's important to hear from the male perspective, the emotional process that happens and the healing process that men go through, or not, after divorce. And so Todd not only works with men, he also has been divorced himself.
Twice,
And
actually.
So, all right, twice. I forgot about that. You did tell me that. So twice.
Yeah.
So he's definitely got some experience in this area. So Todd, can you share in your experience the process you went through after divorce and when you realized that something needed to change internally in order to stop repeating old patterns moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, that's really the question we have to ask ourselves, when we have change. And I think for me, it was different for both times. And again, when we talk about marriage, I mean, basically any relationship that we go through, we go through the same process, whether or not we were legally married or not. I think we all have the same stuff that we have to work through because, as we mentioned, as we were talking before, a lot of it is, going through the grieving process of letting go of something, especially if we're the ones that were kind of the ones left behind, so to speak. We know that if we're the one that's doing the leaving, it's a little different if we're the one that's being dumped or left, so to speak. But irregardless, yeah, it is an opportunity. And if we want to move forward, we really have to take some time to, assess ourselves and figure out, what is it that I need to do in my own personal growth and development in order to, move forward, not just keep repeating the same patterns over and over. And that's work. It takes courage to go into our own psyche and figure out that. It takes courage to really step back and have an open mind and a sort of a non-biased perspective on what was that last relationship. What did I do good? What did I not do so good? What did I learn that I want? What did I learn that I don't want in future relationships? And how do I prepare myself to really, become sort of a, ready for whatever it is I say I want, if we talk about law of attraction and things like that, how do I get myself ready to do that? And, for me, a lot of it comes back, I say this a lot, that, the grieving process And the grieving process is different from the emotion that we describe as grief. The process is actually this process that we go through when we lose something or when things change. And one of the things that we tend to do is try to avoid that process because it's painful and it's uncomfortable. But if we don't go through that process, we get stuck. And so that's why it's really important, in my mind anyway, to take the time to allow that to happen and to be really aware and conscious of what it's teaching us, about the ability to let go. Ultimately, it's about forgiveness, forgiving not only the other person, but ourselves especially. And then sort of learning from that experience. When I worked as a school counselor, we used to talk about mistakes and how it's too bad that, we view things as mistakes as a bad thing, because really mistakes means that we're trying, and that's how we learn. We learn from things that turn out differently than we wanted or anticipated, so we can go back and review that. So for me personally, it was a lot of, Todd time, as I call it. I really just, I had to take some time to really review and reflect and go through the processes of, what happened, why. We get stuck a lot in the whys and the hows and whose fault and blah, 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 blah. But really it was, the part of the grieving process is the idea of coming to terms with accepting the fact that this relationship is no longer what it was. And how do I forgive and be at peace with that, and so that I can move on. And so a lot of that was forgiveness work, because, there's a lot of things to feel guilty about a lot of times. Again, depending on which person you were you the one that got dumped, or were you the dumper? And having
right.
Both ends of that, there's, so I guess we could actually talk about, because that's really important, the two sides of that, because if you're the one that sort of got left behind, so to speak, there's definitely a lot more depth of grief that has to be dealt with. Whereas if you're the one that left the relationship, then you're more dealing with things like guilt. And so how do you work through that and clean that up so that you can be clear moving forward?
Yeah. And I love that you've had both of those, because I haven't had any guests that have had both of those experiences, because I left my marriage. And while it was extremely hard, it was like I was stuck in this should I stay or should I go place forever and couldn't make a move because of fear.
Mm-hmm.
But when I got out of the marriage, it was the guilt. It was the, oh my God, did I really just do that? And now what do I do? But I haven't been on the side of, being left, and whether it's sudden or whether it's, a long process to get there. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about just those two, how what your healing process looked like in those two different scenarios.
Yeah. Well, I'll start with the not the easier one, but so I actually kind of left my first marriage for my second marriage.
Okay.
So it was one of those.
Yeah.
And again, I'm 61, so I've been around for a while. I've been in a lot of relationships. I've 2 marriages, but umpteen relationships in my life, and they all begin to follow certain patterns. Whenever you're in a intimate relationship with somebody, that when a relationship ends, most of the time you fall into one of those two categories. And so I think if you're the one doing the leaving, and guilt becomes sort of the overriding thing, because there is a lot of baggage attached to that, and so my process for clearing that up was really, and I don't necessarily think I always did a good job at that. If it happens in the future, hopefully I'll do a better job. But honesty,
learn, right?
Yes. So honesty, no matter how painful, can be very. That's a big part of it, because when we're not being truthful to ourselves or somebody else, that can wreak a lot of havoc. So being honest, especially with myself, but also with the other person, as much as possible. There's a a Buddhist thing about, before you say something, you want to think about, like, is it true? Is it helpful? Is it necessary? And is it kind? And so the truthful and the necessary parts, if it's something's true, yes, but do I necessarily have to speak it? Well, it depends if it's helpful and if it's kind. And so anyway, weighing all that in, it's not like you just have to blurt out and spill your guts to somebody. And, you want to have some sort of compassion around it as well.
Yes.
But yeah, so forgiveness was the big thing, and realizing for me that I was not happy in the first relationship. It got into a part we had very different desires for what we want. We'd been together for 13 years, and it was just one of these things where, we'd kind of diverged in a lot of ways as far as what we wanted out of life. And for me, it was just, I felt like I was being dishonest by staying in the relationship in a way, because I realized that what my partner wanted was something that I really wasn't on board with for me. It wasn't what I wanted for the rest of my life. And so I was starting to feel resentful. I was starting to feel angry. I was starting to feel, you get that sort of going on where it's like, you can't make me.
And then you're not showing up in the way you want to.
Yeah. It became like very, I didn't like the person I was becoming because I wasn't happy, and I realized that, we'd gone through counseling and things like that. And it just became clear that we just wanted different things in life, and realizing that it's okay to want different things. And, there's a huge stigmatism in society around marriage. Like divorce is the ultimate failure. And depending on what your belief systems are, it could be even worse than that. Mm-hmm. But to me, it's like any relationship, it's a work in progress. It's an evolving thing. It's not this static thing where, you suffer and have a miserable life just because you've, agreed to some kind of contract or whatever. I mean, to me, that's not what life is about. And so being honest with myself that this isn't what I wanted, being honest with the fact that me being in this relationship was not being authentic to me. It wasn't being fair to this other person because I was going to prevent her from getting what she wanted. So all these things just kind of pile up. So when it came to forgiveness, it was kind of like, there's a great quote that's been attributed to Oprah, but I don't know if she said it or not, but I really like it. It's the idea that true forgiveness is when you can look back and say, thank you for the experience.
I love that. Yes, I've heard that one before too. Yes, I love
and
it.
I'm like, that's really what it is. And it takes time, but when you can get to that point where now I can look back and I can say, thank you for that experience. I mean, didn't work out the way nothing works out the way you think it's going to in life anyway, really. But it was just one of those things where, having gratitude for the experience, having that being the overriding thing that I think of or feel when I look back on that experience was really important. And it takes time and conscious work. And I don't know any specific, but anyways, it was just getting to that point.
Yeah, no. So I want to highlight a couple of things because you were talking about leaving the relationship. And I do think this has come up several times in conversations I've had, is people sometimes stay because there's too much shame in leaving. And so there's that. And then there's also this, I don't know if it's societal or what it is, but there's this, I've been married for 50 years. It's like being able to say that. It's like, do we get a merit badge for that? Even though we're miserable? And I just want to highlight that for the audience, because I think there are people out there who are hanging on for those two reasons. But again, this is where I think it's important to see that when we are externally focused on what other people think, then we sit in that shame. We sit in that, oh, the outside world is going to think I'm amazing if I'm in this marriage for 50 years and we make it work. But you're miserable. So it's like, who are you satisfying here in this whole thing? And so I think that, while yes, there's still going to be guilt afterwards, there's still going to be a grieving process that you have to go through. that forgiveness that you highlighted is really important on both sides, I think, whether you're leaving the relationship or whether you're the one being left, because we can beat ourselves up for what I did or what I didn't do. And you have to forgive both the other person and yourself. But you don't have to call the person and say, I forgive you. You have to be able to forgive them, forgive yourself in a way that you let go. I always say to people, if you have to, write it down, write a letter to that person and say, and all the things that you forgive or all the things you want to forgive yourself. And you don't have to send it. You can just write it. And it's that process of releasing it. And so anyway, I just wanted to highlight that because I love that that's part of your process. And I also love that you talked about tapping into authenticity and gratitude for the experience. Those are two beautiful things. And a lot that we talk about on this podcast has to do with tapping into your authentic self. And what does that look like? Because we can't show up well in a relationship if we have no idea who we are, or we're wearing this costume around and not being that authentic, living that authentic life. So thank you for sharing that. But I'd love to hear about your experience on the opposite end of, when you talk about healing and recovery and grief, what did that look like for you?
Well, your thing of writing it down is a big thing, right? Writing that letter, because, literally getting it off your chest, so journaling was very helpful. Just feeling the feelings of the grieving process, allowing myself to listen to a lot of really depressing, sad songs and crying and, flushing that emotion out. You really have to let it flow, so to speak, because if we try and hold it in, then it becomes detrimental in the long run. Being gentle with myself. And I think for me, by that point, I had also realized that, I kind of realized that relationship too was running into some stuff, differences of what we wanted and whatnot. There was a lot of, I guess, baggage. We had gone way back. We knew each other in high school and da. So there was this whole story attached to it, and it's like,
right,
we were killing the dream, and so that whole part of it, and you're like, well, this isn't the fairy tale happy ending it was supposed to be, and da. So
right.
But yeah, allowing that to happen, and I think, what we're really getting at, what you were talking about there, is this idea of authenticity. And there's so many things that work against us giving ourselves permission to be happy, So many things in society, like you say, oh, you get the merit badge for the longest marriage. I mean, and there's some people that have really lifelong marriages that are really happy together,
Absolutely.
But, and if that's the way it is, but being able to recognize that versus I've also known people who've been together for, 40, 50 years that don't even talk to each other. It was just like this thing of like, what's the point, both. So it's two lives wasted in my mind. And I think, society, first of all, divorce has such a stigma to it, which there's a lot of reasons that is, and we don't have to get into them all, but it's not necessarily healthy to stay in an unhealthy relationship. The fact that it's okay, the thing about relationships that I like to think about is that, and I said it earlier, they're constantly evolving, and we as people are constantly evolving. And when you get in a relationship with somebody, that you and your partner are going to change. And if you can manage to navigate that change together and still have enough things in common and enough love and things that it's working, and it's, it's not that you don't have any challenges. I mean, that's what relationships are for, is to be our mirrors, so to speak. But you don't want to be such a point where life becomes just this gray, dull, depressing thing, because to me, that's a life wasted. So going through the processes, journaling was a big thing, and holding this idea that everything that happens to me happens for my benefit. this was a big paradigm shift. Was not that everything's working against me, but everything is working for me. And the interesting thing about that is, as soon as that last relationship ended, and I did this work, I spent 2 months. I went away on a retreat. I did all this journaling. I did all this forgiveness work. I mean, I really consciously had forgiveness. Like, even I remember, like, just the last day I was in the house, because I was in the marriage and we had 3 stepkids. They were my stepkids, and they were gone for a week, and I had a week to move everything out. And I remember going through the house in each of the kids' rooms and just sitting there and just saying thank you, and praying and giving blessings, and just like, thank you, and may you have a beautiful life. And I have no idea what the future is going to be like, but I just wish you the best. And, so happy and grateful for what we've had, and da, da, da. And so I left there, even though it was gut-wrenchingly sad. It wasn't like, it was like, thank you for whatever has been. And that really helped me soften and be kind of okay. And the amazing thing is, I wasn't single for more than a month before I met Sue, who came into my life, who I've now been with for the last 12 years. And it was almost like that relationship had to end, because this one was ready to go almost. And, it wasn't anything I was looking for. I was like, well, I'm going to be single for the first time in 20 years. I was kind of excited. And it's like, nope. But I realized that if I hadn't done any of that work, and if that relationship hadn't ended right there, it's just, the timing was impeccable, So it's this whole thing that, maybe, life.
It's that divine timing.
Yeah, you never know.
I'm telling you. Yeah.
But also the fact that I had done the work. So I was open. And I was like, I'm okay. I mean, there's always going to be stuff coming up. I mean, you don't just get over a marriage overnight. It takes years and years. But I was okay, and I was ready. And I wasn't looking for anything, And that's when these things come into your life, because I'm just happy being me. I'm going to enjoy myself. And I attracted somebody that was their attitude. And it's like, well, now we just enjoy ourselves together. And so,
and you just have to surrender to the flow of what's happening in life. And I do believe there's a reason. I mean, I love it. It totally hit me when you just said going into each room and doing that, because it was something that I did when I left the family home and moved into my condo at the time. And I remember someone else had said that to me: go into each room, give gratitude, blessings. And I did. It was just like you said, I could picture you, because it was so sad, but at the same time, it was also such a beautiful experience. I was like, thank you, house, for just loving us, being here, like surrounding us, and, giving us these memories, and, everything that we had. Like, it's, like what you said earlier about the experience, like, for giving me this experience, like, wow. And so that just touched me so much. I just had to say that, because I think that's beautiful when you can do that. So to anyone out there who, is struggling with leaving that home, because the home can be, such a difficult thing. It's like to let go of, because we associate it with our life and our memories and all these things. But if you really there's a time for everything. And, that time was beautiful, but now it's time to move on to something else. And so I love that you shared that. But I want to go back to something you said, Todd, because this is something I finally learned and have been using a lot in my current relationship with Rob, is really about that person being your mirror. Can you talk a little bit about what you mean by that? Because I think that's really important. Meaning when people say, well, wait a minute, mirror, does that mean I want them to look like me? Like, no, that's not it.
No.
So I want you to can you describe that for the audience?
Okay. Yeah. So one of the things about being in a loving sort of, sensual, whatever you want to call it, romantic relationship, is that one of the things I describe love as relaxation. Love is the ability to be relaxed, to the ability to be authentic, the ability to be, who we are, kind of open-hearted in a way. And when we get with somebody and we let our guard down because we trust them, because we feel relaxed, things like that, we become vulnerable. And what happens in relationships is when we become vulnerable and show our true selves, our partner is kind of like the thing that we are the closest to, that we are the most open to, that is most likely to push our buttons and trigger us and,
Yes.
just sort of, hit those spots that, I wouldn't normally open myself up to this to anybody else. But that, again, is a gift in a way, right? Because when we love somebody enough and supposedly they love us enough that we can be open like that, and the fact that anything that really agitates and aggravates me about this person that I'm in the relationship with is an opportunity to look at myself, because we're always trying to change the other person.
Yes, yes.
If I could just change this about you, life would be perfect, right? But that's when you realize that it has nothing to do with that, it's coming back to me. So what's going on with me that I need to pay attention to so that I cannot, hopefully not be triggered by this. And so when you look at that as sort of an opportunity and a gift versus an annoyance, I mean, it can still be annoying, but it can still be a gift. But it really, it's that one relationship in our lives. Even if it's not a romantic partner, it could be our parents, it could be our children, it could be anybody that we're close to. But when people push those things in us and cause these reactions, it means that, okay, there's something in myself that I might want to pause and, pay some attention to see what's going on with that. Why do I have this type of reaction to it if it's not a loving, open reaction, And so life has always given us those types of opportunities.
Yes, it is.
But the romantic relationships tend to be the primary ones, because that's, we tend to spend the most time with those people. We're also the most open and vulnerable and closest to those people. So, when we look at that as an opportunity to learn and grow versus to try and, manipulate or change the other person, it's a lot more healthy and seems to work out a lot better, because most people don't like being changed.
Yeah. And so thank you for explaining that, because I think that is so important. First of all, one of the things you said literally just happened to me this morning is, so I love birds and I'm super quirky. Like I love my weirdness and I love like letting it out. But in other relationships, I always pushed it down. I always was like, no, this person wants this, so I'm going to be this. And one of the things that I committed to myself about and was being authentic, but not only being authentic, it's that other word that you used, which is vulnerability, and allowing yourself to it's almost like being naked in a mirror, right? It's like standing there. I remember the first time I did that and I was like, what's happening? It's just like literally with another person, just being okay with letting it all be seen. And, Rob said something to me this morning, actually, when I was looking out at birds, he got tears in his eyes. And he's like, oh man, you remind me so much of just coming back to the present moment. And I said, well, I'm so glad that you embrace my weirdness. And he said, if I'm not doing that, then there's something wrong with me. Meaning, if I am upset because of something that you are expressing and I come at it in a negative way, then there's something inside of me that's off balance, out of balance. And so I love that you shared that, because that's exactly it, is we so often look to the other person to make us okay. And that is, we have to make ourselves okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that is that whole thing about, showing up in a relationship in a real, vulnerable, authentic way where you also see the other person for who they are. And if you aren't okay with that, meaning if that person, you want this person, oh, that's good, but I want to tweak this a little bit. I like this. That's not the relationship. There's something wrong with you that you need to really look at. So anyway, I love all that you shared. And yeah, and I love your relationship with Sue from what I know and what I heard from her. So, there definitely are no accidents in life. But I do want to also ask you something that comes up fairly often with women that I talk to is around the idea of men getting, quote, help. And it's as someone who works with men, so not only being a man yourself, but someone who, works with men, talks with men regularly, I would love to get your perspective on the idea of men going to therapy or getting coaching. Do you feel that there is something there that, I've heard over and over with guests? So I was willing to go to therapy, but he wasn't willing to go. Or, men, they don't want to see what's on the other side. And so, they don't like therapy or to do the talking. Do you think that's true? And do you think there's a reason for it if it is true?
Yeah, well, it's a huge topic.
Yeah, I know.
I know. A lot of it, I think, is societal. And what you said is true that as men in our society anyway, I hear so often that, one of the things as a man is you have to be strong and not show emotion. And one guy actually asked me a question one time. He's like, why is it that anger is the only emotion that's acceptable for a man to show?
Oh.
And I thought about that. I'm like, wow, it's like the only anger is the only emotion that it's acceptable for a man to show, because anger is like this, don't mess with me type of thing, right? And it's like when you're at your wit's end and you don't know what to do, anger is one of those sort of emotions that can take over. But it's, this power, this control, this, false sense of control, basically. When we're also, as men, we're taught to figure stuff out and do stuff for ourselves. Like it's a sign of weakness to ask for help. It's a sign of weakness to have to, and especially to talk about stuff. There's this fascinating video on YouTube that Sue and I discovered a while ago, and it's called Men's Brains, Women's Brains. And it's by this guy, Mark somebody. He's like I don't know what he is, but he travels around.
I'm writing this down.
It's hilarious. You have to watch it. It's so good. It's so good. But he has this theory that men's brains and women's brains, a lot of it's based on the men are from Mars, women are from Venus type of stuff.
Yes, read that book.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So how our brains are actually wired differently, And with women's brains, everything's all connected and everything, blah, 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 blah. And men have like individual boxes for every single thing. And the way that men process is they go into this box that women don't have, and it's called the nothing box. And the way a man relaxes is he goes into his nothing box and he's just like, just basically veges out, and he doesn't want to talk. He doesn't want to interact. He just wants to sit there and do nothing, because that's how he de-stresses, right? Whereas women want to talk.
They want to talk.
That's how they de-stress.
I knew you were going to say that.
It's hilarious. Like you got the guy sitting there in his nothing box, and the woman's like, "Why won't you talk to me?" And it drives the man crazy, and it drives the woman crazy that the man doesn't want to talk. It's hilarious. But I think I'm like, there's some truth to that. There really is. But so that's the humorous way of it. The sad part of it for me is that we have been, especially in our society, it's this thing where, what is a man? What is it acceptable for a man to do? It's not, and hopefully this is changing, and it wasn't necessary, but it was even for me to some extent, like boys don't cry, men figure it out for themselves. Asking for help is weakness. yeah, being vulnerable, I was having a conversation with
Yes.
a woman the other day. We were just talking and like, what is it about our society? She was talking about how she'd gone to Africa for a couple of years. And when she would walk down the street, everybody would look at you and smile and say hi. But when you come to America and you walk down the street, everybody's like, nobody wants
Head
to look
down.
at, you're afraid if anybody talks to you that they're going to want something, that they're, we have this suspicion and this sort of paranoia around engaging with people. And especially as men, I would say, I mean, and the other thing that I find, doing a men's group and stuff is women are very good at getting together and processing together and just spending time together. And if you go way back in history, part of that makes sense because women were in the villages taking care of the children, the families, and the society where the men were out hunting. And when you're hunting, you have to be quiet, so you don't talk. So
Makes total sense.
there's all this stuff in there. But, the way we are now, when it becomes, it's like anything, things serve a purpose, but when they become detrimental to our health and well-being and happiness, we need to start reassessing, how we do that. I would say that, again, it's, there's this whole thing about, and I just, I say it in jest, but how women are always like, oh, if I could just change this about him or just change that. Yes. And then with men, you have it's like the Stepford wives, right? Oh, if I could just push this button and reprogram this, like we wouldn't have any problems, but then there wouldn't be any dynamic. There wouldn't be any, friction. There wouldn't be any growth. So a lot of it is my suggestion would be like, so if we're getting to the point of like, how do you instigate or promote a conversation with your male partner? Berating them usually is going to backfire, like complaining, berating, right? I mean, so you have to be sort of tactful about how you approach wanting to have a conversation, and, butter them up a little and, be nice. I mean, as men, you think about it, like so much of our interaction with women is the way that we grew up in the relationships we had with our mothers, and if you had a mom that was berating and complaining and always, I mean, that's your thing. Or if you have the mother that was like overbearing and So, I mean, there's so much that goes on. It's not simple, but I think for me, it's really about what I would want and what I try to do at a conversation is, and you mentioned this thing about trying to see somebody for who they really are, rather than going through this story about everything that I don't like about this person or what I would change about them, or if only then I could be happy. It's like, well, the happiness is my choice, but how can I have compassion and an open heart and a curiosity about my partner, especially, and what they're going through, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and to have those types of conversations. And it's not easy, because we're not taught how to have good conversations. We're not taught how to be present. And the other thing that's a big issue that we've, sort of touched upon a little bit is this idea of taking care of ourself first, and how selfishness is seen as a bad thing in our society, Whereas as a minister and as a counselor, one of the first things and the primary thing that we're taught is like, you have to take care of yourself first, because if you are not happy, healthy, and in a good place, you can't help anybody else. You can't show up to a relationship in a good place if you haven't taken care of yourself, and nobody can take care of yourself, your mental and emotional and spiritual stuff, other than you. But society tells you that, well, that's being selfish, or you're a narcissist, or you're blah, 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 right? All this stuff. And basically it's like, well, these are just people that want me to do something that they want me to do versus what I want to do. And so who do I listen to?
Yeah.
And so that's another big thing. We have all these social stigmas that we really need to kind of unpack for ourselves and do work around, to forgive and to be grateful for and whatever. But to really figure out what is it in my life that I'm willing to buy into and accept for what's right for me, giving ourselves permission to really figure out what it is that makes us happy, and how do I get that, and how do I create a life around me with people, with jobs, with all these things that fulfill me, so that I feel like my life has meaning and purpose versus, I'm just here living out some kind of a sentence, I mean, there's a big
Yeah.
difference. And we're only here for a limited amount of time. And, for my mind, it's like, my job is to enjoy it to the fullest, because why else are we here? We're not here to just be miserable,
Yeah.
It's like, that's not what
Oh,
creation wants. Creation wants to experience it from, so anyway.
exactly.
Yeah.
And that's it, but it's really hard for us because of all the things that you highlighted. And raising a boy myself, I will say there was nothing that upset me more than when someone, a male in his life, whether it was his father or someone else, said to him when he would be emotional and cry, "Stop being a wimp." I, it upset me so much. So wait a minute, girls can cry all day long. My daughter can cry all day long and nothing. That's fine. That's acceptable. But he shows his emotions about something and he's a wimp. Like, there's so much there. And then the whole provider piece, around I need to provide, women, especially when there's kids involved, it's like these roles start to take form. It's like even though we've evolved, we really haven't in some areas where, I think part of it is maternal. A woman has a child and all of a sudden that's her full responsibility. She becomes a mother. The costume is on, she is playing the role and she's going to be perfect at it. And now the male is like, "Ooh, I have a child I need to provide for. So I am going to work my ass off, maybe not ever be around, stress myself out completely, not look at my emotions at all, and drive myself into an early grave." Like, and then you wonder why these two that are living together can't seem to have any sort of intimacy.
Yeah.
And by intimacy, I don't mean just sexual intimacy. I mean, intimacy means really connecting with someone, right?
Yep. Yep.
It's that connection. And I think so many people lose that in a marriage. And
Yeah, especially when the kids show up. I mean,
oh,
working as a school counselor, it's like, and having, having been in marriages with kids, it's like they can become all consuming,
yes.
and that is the real test of relationships, and so then we talk about things like balance, and each person has to find, where's my balance point so that I'm not getting burned out? How do I make time to have, and it's really what it comes down to is a narrowing down of priorities. Like, before you have kids, I can have all these activities and these things that I do because I have time and energy. You have a kid, it's like, it comes down to like, I got 2 or 3 things I can focus on for the next few years.
Yes.
I'm not going to have energy for all of it, right? And the relationship, right? Especially if your primary relationship with the partner starts drifting apart because of that. And I mean, that's a lot of what I experienced. It just became mind-numbingly overwhelming. It wasn't fulfilling. The communication breaks down.
Yes.
The kid, and it's, raising kids is probably the hardest job there is. Not necessarily just because of the kids, but trying to keep a relationship together. Yeah, I mean, it really is.
It's so difficult.
It is, and there's no easy answer to it because every kid is different, every relationship is different, everybody's circumstances are different. Yeah, and it's
And
really,
it's challenging. And that's why I think so many people, not just women, so many men and women, after they leave the marriage, so the marriage dissolves and they're no longer a part of sort of that family unit and they have to redefine sort of what family looks like, it also becomes this, I hate to say opportunity, but it's like anything. It's like when you go through a big change in your life, it's like it shifts you to focus on what's really important. And unfortunately, divorce does that to a lot of people. And then it's like, okay, wait a second. I was in the midst of this whole unit and now I'm outside of it and I don't know who I am. I don't know what I like. I don't know how to manage my finances. Da 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 da. You like the list goes on and on. And so that's why this podcast is so much about like really discovering you, because you lose yourself, whether you have kids or not. I think we tend to lose ourselves somewhere along the way. And it's when we start to reprioritize and figure out, what lights us up, like you said, being able to be selfish and, actually put yourself first. It is when I really believe it because I've seen it in action so many times. When you put yourself first and you take care of yourself, you show up differently for everybody else. I 100% believe that, and I have seen it. And so I think this whole, well, I got to take care of my kids. I got to take care of this or that or the other thing. It's like, well, time out. You can't do any of that until you reprioritize yourself and figure out who you are so that you can show up better and navigate this life in hopefully a little bit of a more manageable, balanced way. And so my last question, Todd, because I could talk to you forever. I have so many questions. I hope people that are listening in, like, add comments, reach out, because Todd has so much information to share. And so I would love to ask you about, you talked about this relationship sort of showed up. And I hear on, all these Facebook groups, women that I talk to, there's no men out there. There's no good men out there. How am I going to get into a next relationship? And it's like, I hate online dating. You can't find anybody. And I'm not sure I fully believe that. What do you think? How do you know at really any age that you are ready for a relationship and that, you can show up in a healthy way? I mean, is there some sort of advice that you could give around that piece? Dating?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, great.
So for me, and from my experience, having had these conversations with lots of people, is that if you are desperately seeking a relationship, like if I am approaching it from a sense of desperation, then that's what I'm going to attract, is desperation and unhealthiness, and I'm not going to be able to think clearly. For me, and when I came out of that second relationship, was the idea that I am perfectly happy by myself. I love being able to do what I want to do when I want to do it because it lights me up and I can be totally me. And I'm happy with my life. If at some point people come into my life as part of a, romantic relationship, it's an added bonus. But my life doesn't stop because I don't have it. And I'm not going to let the fact that I don't have it impact my ability to enjoy and live my life to the fullest right now. Because the reality is, people come, everything has changed, right? We have no idea who's going to come, when they're going to come, when they're going to go, when we're going to go, so it really comes down to, for me, this ability to be living my life to its fullest for myself. And then when I have somebody or I attract somebody, like in my case, when Sue came along, I was just like, wow, we just get to play together. That's really all it is. It's just, we're together because we want to be together, because we enjoy each other's company. We have fun. Sometimes we don't. We have a lot of differing things, likes and dislikes. We're free to go out and do what we want to do, so that nobody gets resentful because, well, I can't do this because it's your fault, or blah, 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 blah. It's like, if you want to travel to Morocco, you go to Morocco. I have no interest, but that's so it's this ability where you're sort of, it's like a safe place to land almost, where I'm complete in myself and I love being in this relationship. if I don't have it, like if she's gone for a month or 2 months, I'm like, I'm fine. It's like, wow, I can watch all these like war movies that I can't watch when she's home, I could, and I'm fine with that. So it's this thing where it's an appreciation, and it's kind of an added bonus in a way. But I will say, I had this conversation again yesterday with another woman about the difference between being alone and being lonely. And being lonely
yes.
can really takes a lot of energy, and it can become very depressing and things like that. So you have to find things like you're talking about, lighting yourself up, right? Hobbies, things that I love to do, art, creative things. For me, it's music or whatever. So that I can be lit up irregardless of whether or not Sue's in my life, And so that really would be my thing, is exactly what we're talking about, is you have, that's sort of the responsibility part. And it's the work that we do, is like, how can I be happy irregardless of what my romantic relationship status is, And I think for so many people, probably especially women, that there's sort of a social value to being in a relationship, right? Like, oh, I have a relationship, therefore I'm a more complete person, therefore I'm more successful, therefore, again, all this stuff that we're bombarded with, you really have to be able to step back from that and think about what really makes me happy, And to me, that's been the key. And again, if you believe in the law of attraction type of stuff, it's like, when I'm happy and I'm going through my life full of happiness, that's the type of people that I'm going to attract into my life. And if something clicks with one of them, it's so much better than if I'm desperate and then I attract another desperate person and we're just so desperate for a relationship that, who knows what happens.
Yeah, no, it's so true.
Yeah.
I love everything that you said, because it's also, it's that energy that we put out, right? It's like what we put out, we get back.
Yep.
And so I love what you said in the beginning about this like desperation around like, I need to have somebody, that's why, like, I always talk about this work of healing. It's really it's such a journey, healing doesn't mean like healing just from like the grief and like that. It's such a long process of really figuring out, like, to your point, what makes me happy by myself? What, I tell people all the time, take yourself on a date. Go out by yourself, explore the world. Like, I was so afraid to sit in a restaurant by myself. What? Because I didn't want someone to see me alone until I did it.
Yeah.
And I started to get comfortable doing it. And, I'm not saying put yourself in, in a scary situation by any means by yourself, but really just getting to know you again. Like, what do you enjoy? And that means spending time with yourself.
That's right.
And it can be with other people too, once you figure out what those things are that you love, but it truly is a journey. And then, as you find that happiness and that energy is there, beautiful things show up if we're open to it and we surrender to it. And so love what you just shared. So many things. And so, Todd, before we close out, can you share with the audience if they want to get in touch with you, if they want to find out what you're doing, if they want to learn more about Todd, where can they go?
Sure. Well, I have a whole lot of different things going on, not all that would relate directly to what we've been talking about, but probably the easiest way is you can find me on Facebook, just Todd Glacy, or you could email me at toddglacy@outlook.com. And I've got, like I said, I do a lot of different things, but I'm always happy to converse and connect with people for whatever. And I love just
great
checking out and hanging out and talking deep and meaningless topics.
I love it. Well, you're good at it. And so I'll include Todd's contact information in the show notes as well. So just to wrap up, if you are interested, I like to let the audience know in joining the From Mrs. to Me community. You can find us on Facebook at From Mrs. to Me, Rediscovering You After Divorce, where you will also find tools, resources, and information on my upcoming retreat this fall. If you enjoyed this episode, though, please give it a review, a rating, and subscribe so we can keep this going. And thank you so much, Todd. This was such a great conversation. I'm so excited for this to go live. And to all of you out there, remember, you can't pour from an empty cup. So keep doing that inner work, and I'll see you here next time. I hope you enjoyed another episode of From Mrs. to Me, real life stories of real women and their journey of transformation after divorce. I'm Crissy Freeman, and if you like this episode, please drop a review in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Do you have a story to share? Are you ready to inspire other women on their journey through divorce? If so, find me on Instagram at From Mrs. to Me. For more tools and resources on creating your path to transformation after divorce, follow my community on Facebook, From Mrs. to Me, Rediscovering You After Divorce.